How many different compositions or scenes to paint can you see in this photo? Just the one, maybe two, perhaps three or more? In this video, I'm going to paint a picture by exploring a photo of a street scene and searching for different compositions to paint. So when you look at a photo you're going to paint from, don't think just I'm going to copy this scene exactly. There could be endless possibilities and choices by adjusting the framing, the cropping, moving objects around, zooming in, zooming out, focusing on different elements of the photo. You could create perhaps completely endless different compositions from one photo. Hello, I'm Tim Wilmot, watercolor painter and tutor producing videos and online workshops. In this step-by-step demo, I'll be walking you through my process of selecting a composition and creating a painting from this reference photo. You'll see how I analyze my kind of thought process on the photo, making decisions about what to include, what to leave out, and adjusting the framing to create a more dynamic composition and how to use color, watercolor and brushwork to bring the painting to life. So the scene is Bath in the UK on a fairly damp December day. Thanks very much to a Patreon member of mine, Tim, for the kind sharing of this image. And this is, as I say, it's central Bath, UK, and a number of different compositions immediately come to mind here. Let me just edit this photo and we can do a little bit of cropping and zooming in. So first of all, if you're a vertical format type of person, then that could be a possibility. Let me just sort of zoom in a bit, maybe. Bring that down a bit, move those figures to the right. That could be quite a nice scene, maybe quite an extreme vertical composition. But I quite like those branches, those overhanging branches coming in from the bottom right, just sort of shooting up in that top left corner. So that could be one. Another one might be looking at that group of people there in front of the shop, something like that. Maybe even imagine a different sort of lighting. As I said, it's December's day. Maybe imagine the sun's coming out and we could have a little bit of shadow coming across here. So the sun in the top left corner, maybe a little bit of light hitting some of these figures, the bollards, that bin there, that shop light could be quite bright as well against a darker background. So that might be a possibility there. Let's just reset those. And another possibility would be to zoom in on that market cellar. Quite typical as you find in Bath. Let me just zoom right in here. Imagine that lighter background and the silhouetted figures, the market seller, a customer or two, the squarish geometric shapes of the baskets coming out from the middle of the seller's area. That might be quite nice. That kind of pattern of that kind of like a step going down to the right hand side. That would be a possibility. What I'm going to do in this video is, let me just zoom back out a little bit, is something like, we just go up a little bit like that there. Something a bit more like that. So that tree on the left-hand side, keep the market seller in that left-hand third. We've got the light hitting the background buildings, that arch of the background building coming over to the right-hand side, darker building on the right-hand side, various street furniture, those bollards, street lights, benches, we can move those around, play with those. I quite like this figure, the figure here, the light head against a darker background. Now that figure is on the left-hand side of the composition, but walking away from or walking towards that left-hand side. I would prefer keeping that figure roughly where it is, but maybe moving the figure just a little bit further away from us, but have the figure walking into the middle of the composition. I think that would be a better balance, a better composition for this scene. So that's my thoughts. Let me get right into the painting process. We'll be starting with the outline drawing, and I'll go through the complete process with you. If you've got any comments at all or questions, pop those into the comments of this video. Be happy to see those and respond to those. As I say, I'm going to go through the complete painting process with you and do a little bit of a critique on myself at the end as well. So stick around to the end where I go through the negatives and the positives of my particular attempt at the scene. Now, the paper I'm using is Saunders Waterford. This is cold press paper, and it's 300 grams or 140 pounds in weight. It's 15 inches by 11 inches. I'll describe my paints as I go through, but a really important step, getting the drawing right first of all. So starting in that top left corner with the edge, the corner of the building, and getting the angle of the roof sort of correct, and the lower part of the roof correct in that composition as well. Thinking about how much space I need for that sky as well. In the middle, background buildings, and on the right, there's sort of like a gentle arch of buildings coming around to the right-hand side, and the angles of the rooftops at slightly different angles, some a little bit steeper than others. These chimney stacks, the chimneys of the buildings as well, quite iconic in Bath. And then a few verticals, the coming down to the street level, the signage on top of the ground floor of these buildings. Now that angle there, I'm trying to sort of line it up with the right-hand side. I've pretty much done it. Might be just a little bit off by a degree or two. But a fairly straight edge, and then the parasol of the vegetable cellar, that tree, just an indication of a few of the branches. Don't tend to draw in all of the branches, and it's quite a nice tree. It's got sort of very twisted, gnarly branches and twigs. Below the parasol of the vendor, we've got the different produce coming out from the stall and going out into the street, that kind of step pattern. The key figure, the gentleman with the light hair, white hair and jacket, perhaps a little bit of a rucksack as well, which you quite often find in Bath. People there for the day, visiting the day, and they got all their stuff in their rucksack. And it's winter, suitable winter clothing, but try and get a bit of movement in this figure with the legs striding towards that middle. I don't tend to put a lot of effort into doing the legs. I like to try and keep it as loose as possible. I spend more time on the sort of top part of the body, trying to get that looking right, and then leaving it to the painting stage to paint the lower parts of the figures. It's particularly true of more distant figures. Then I would spend less time actually drawing those. They're just a quick sort of squiggle in the scene. A few more details of the buildings. Get in the sweep of the road, bollards. As you can see, I've moved the bollards around a little bit. And that's pretty much the drawing done. Don't spend an awful lot of time doing it. And now I'm going to pre-wet the paper. I'm going to do a bit of wetting wet, and wetting the paper, or making sure the surface is damp, and then painting into it. It's called wetting wet. You of you that know watercolor techniques a lot will be familiar with this, but wetting the paper beforehand can help create a more fluid application of blending the colors, applying the colors. Water on the paper will allow the colors to spread a little bit more with gravity. I've got a bit of a lean on my board, about 10 degrees. They'll with gravity they'll sort of go down, but they can go upwards the opposite direction as well. And secondly, wetting the paper can also help prevent any harsh edges or straight edges, hard edges that can occur when painting on dry paper. So the water will allow the paint to flow more naturally and create a more organic and natural approach. So I'm just applying it all over the paper here with my mop brush. This is a Da Vinci Casano. I tend to alternate between a squirrel mop brush and a synthetic mop brush. This is, I believe it's mostly synthetic, this brush. It's got a good point, holds a lot of water, and I could have applied the water with a sponge, but I just prefer with a brush. And I'm also, you can't see, but I'm also looking at my paper against the light, and where you see that little bit of a glare with the light above my surface, I can just make sure that I've applied an even layer. I don't want any, the paper is going to buckle a little bit, so it hasn't been stretched. It is going to buckle a little bit. It will go dry, it will go flatter as I go through the painting process, and you can just see the glimmer is just beginning to ever so slightly disappear. And I don't want the paper to be saturated, but just where I've still got that little bit of a glisten on the paper. A little bit of an application there, just make sure that's nice and evenly spread over. I'll describe my colors, my palette as I'm doing that. And as per normal, on the right hand side, neutral tint. Oh, these colors, by the way, they're really good paints from Jackman's Art Materials. In the description of this video, you will find a link to Jackman's Art Materials, and you can get 10% discount on your first order from this UK supplier. I've been using them for some time now. Really vibrant colors, good range of colors as well, professional grade, handmade, good price as well. All right. So I've got neutral tint, burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, spring green, just putting in that sky there. Quite a kind of light sky, lighter sky, and all the way down over the buildings, all over the place. So I'm just applying a little bit more moisture to the paper as well. Where was I? Viridian green, cobalt green, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, that shiny one, shiny one with the light, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, cadmium red, then a light red, a bit like English oxide, and cadmium orange, cadmium yellow, which has been completely contaminated with a blue. I think I was trying to make a nice green in the last painting. Anyway, getting in this base colour, all right, for the painting on this wet paper, and it's spreading a little bit. I want to try and get a nice vertical line here for the building. There is a lighter building in the middle, which I want to just have a bit of an edge around that building. Keep that fairly light or lightish. Back to the left-hand side, just apply the colour, bit thicker, bit darker over there on that left-hand side. bit of a yellow ochre, burnt sienna, sort of warmish brown, a warmish brown colour. I've got down in the bottom right corner a new paint for me. This is gouache. This one is actually not Jackman's Art Materials. Jackman's Art Materials don't do gouache yet, but this is a light Naples yellow or Naples yellow light gouache. I find it quite nice for doing grass against using it as a sort of body paint in a sort of field or rural landscape. But here I just detect a little bit of lightness. I think it's an ideal match for that building colour on that right hand side. Now with wet in wet, if the paint is going just a little bit too far over, I can just lift it off while the paper is still damp. There we are, and still get a little bit of an edge there, even though I'm lifting off with that paper tissue. All right, cobalt blue, yellow ochre, a grey for the road surface. It's a damp, dull day, similar to the last video, one of the more recent videos I've done on Bath, the Bath Street scene, which I did as part of my Patreon, one of my Patreon projects. So every month on Patreon, we have a very challenging project to do. And every month we do something different, street scenes, landscapes, seascapes, alternating between them. I normally always choose a scene from one of my members' library of photos. So this is one of Tim's. Thank you again, Tim. And yeah, a similar scene we did recently outside the Theatre Royal in Bath. Now, down on this road surface, I'm just beginning to apply a darker colour to that left-hand side, because that's the side where we've got a bit of reflection of the darker building on the left-hand side, and then on the right-hand side we've got again a slightly lighter building, but still a little bit darker than in the middle. I want that light to be in the middle, where it's being reflected from that middle light building. I'm imagining the light is over the left-hand side somewhere. Now, with this wet in wet technique, I can just keep applying more paint. And this is where it's good to have good quality paper. I'm using the Saunders Waterford paper. 100% cotton paper is ideal for this. And if you ever find your paper not being absorbent enough, or you don't have enough time to work on your painting, or the paint is drying too quickly, if you're using cellulose or wood pulp watercolor paper, they're good, but they're not as good as 100% cotton paper. So always try and buy the best quality paper you can. I'm often changing my brushes every 5 minutes. I'm a sucker for buying a new brush, but my paints rarely change, and the paper invariably never changes either. I stick to the one brand, and then you get to know it well, rather than just keep changing the paper. It's there's too many things to think about in watercolor, and one variable that can't change, or doesn't have to change for me, is the paper. So I just know how it's going to handle, and the drying times and so on. I'm putting in now some of now it's just beginning to dry a little bit too much there, but the surface is still quite damp, and I'm putting in the reflections of those bollards. Now, if it's not strong enough, I could go in later on with some dry brush marks, but just wanted to, while the going was good, just put in those little reflections there of that street furniture. There are figures there as well. I could have done that also. I'm now starting to apply slightly thicker colour. Just mop up that little bead that's forming there at the bottom. As I say, with gravity, we've got a little bit of an accumulation appearing at the bottom of my paper. Just got to keep an eye on that. And with the tape around the side, any sort of blobs that might be inadvertently going back into painting, just need to be a little bit careful of that. So keep applying the paint. There we are, mop it up a little bit. There's the bit in the bottom right corner there that was could have gone back into the painting. My plein air setup, my easel tilts, my board tilts, so I can, as the water is gradually coming down, I can tilt the board backwards, if you can understand or see what I'm saying, and then that moves the water back in the other direction again. So that does help. But this board for filming, it's static and it doesn't move. It's got that angle, so just got to keep an eye on that. Between the left-hand side and the right-hand side are some distant buildings. They are pretty much a similar value to the buildings on the right, but I just want to try and make them a little bit lighter, push them back. I've got that soft edge again on the roof line, on the skyline of the rooftops there. Just gently going up to that right-hand side and down to the bottom. So I'm working this sort of light to dark and going with that lighter colour in the background, first of all. These will, as you know, those of you into watercolour, the watercolour paints will, the actual surface will, the paints will dry lighter. So we have to compensate that sometimes to prevent getting a painting that's too light in appearance. We want to try and be true to the values that we're aiming for. And I do sometimes find when I'm painting, my paint's dry too light. And the danger of going in again on top is that you lose that freshness with watercolor. You want to try and get it right first time in the minimum amount of brush marks. Let's warm things up a little bit then with some of these shop signs. This sort of red, I picked up a cadmium red, bit of alizarin crimson as well, so it's not too bright a red. And with the brush, got a good edge on this brush, just gently put in those shop signs. Just creates that nice bit of a border there, bit of a horizontal interest going over. Might need to be just a little bit darker at the base of the buildings on the left. I generally mix my darks at the top and then cooler colours in the middle, and then the warms down in the bottom of those three. Ideally, I could do with some more mixing areas. It's always nice to have a darker area, a cool area, a warm area, and then if I'm doing landscapes, maybe a green, different greens. This then is the reflection of the tree. Got this damp road surface, some subtle reflections little bit darker than the surface they're on, and the start of the reflection has a little bit of a harder edge, just a little bit darker, so I'm just putting in a tiny bit of paint there where the reflections are starting from, and then as they vertically go down for a short distance, they disappear, they get lighter, edges are softer. Just a few little spots of paint there. Really, this whole bottom is full of softness. As I'm looking at my source photo, I'm looking for just some inspiration for any extra blobs of colour or darkness on that in that bottom left corner. Bit of cerulean blue, and let's get the rooftop in cooler colour for the rooftops. That's quite dark, but I think it needs it. Harder edge now, that sky area has dried, so I can get in that hard edge, making sure the angle is right for the rooftops there. This brush is quite adaptable, just holding it a little bit closer to the business end, then I can be a little bit more controlled, or hold it as I'm doing now a little bit further up the brush, up the handle, get more of a looser approach. Now down to the wall of the building, and we're going back into that warmer colour. Dark over on the left hand side, bit of light maybe coming in the middle of the building, but yellow ochre, burnt sienna, almost a 50-50 mix of this. You can see I'm going right over the windows. I know some people might actually paint around the windows, but that sort of well, I could actually paint around. I could leave some of the windows unpainted, and then I've left my options open then towards the end. When I paint in the windows, I could go a little bit darker or leave them light. Maybe there could be lighter curtains or some reflections going against them, but on the whole, a building in the shade like this, I'm just going to go over it, but it's just introduce a few subtle variations in the colour of the wall there, which you do find in Bath. The stone work is, you've got this sort of generally a sort of yellow ochre, but as the buildings are maybe suffering from the weathering and a little bit of pollution in the city, then they do get this stain, and that the buildings are cleaned, they're sort of power washed, or they're washed in their particular way, and it gets back that lovely lighter colour again. But I think it's quite nice getting these sort of subtle stains appearing on the colours of the wall. Just gives a bit of interest to a bigger area like that. We've got a large area of wall. We need to have some variations in tone and colour in there. Painted around the guy's head, so that's just beginning to stand out now. Same brush, get a good edge, get in the rooftops now on the right hand side, starting with that, hopefully a good edge along the bottom. Just watch my hand, make sure I'm not smudging my the wet surface below, which I may do a little bit, but never mind. And it's still pretty damp down there in the bottom right corner. This is why it's good to do, or try and get a good drawing first of all, particularly with these rooftops, these angles and the perspective, And then it's just a simple case of following these. I might need to, there is a bit of light hitting the division between, there's some raised bits of this rooftop, this line of rooftops as we come around, and there's a little bit of light hitting those. With my painting, I need to make sure I go up to the pencil outline that I've created, particularly as I've got a light sky, and I can just see there I've got a few little chimneys left. I can see the pencil outline of those chimneys. There's a dormer window there, bit of light against that window, the light coming from the left hand side. So I need to make sure I go up to those edges of those chimneys. It's a little bit laborious, this. Generally, when I'm doing buildings like this, it's not the most pleasurable experience trying to have to paint around these different shapes, but it has to be done in certain key areas, like these windows, these dormer windows that are sticking out of the rooftop. They're quite an important feature of the Regency architecture in Bath, so do it justice. There's chimney. And the little chimney pots on top. Again, a fairly iconic feature of the chimneys. Those sometimes 3, 4, I guess down below the chimney there's various flues and chimneys connect to that. Various stoves in the buildings below. Probably not used too much now, because it's I think it's one of these clean air zones in Bath, and things like wood burning stoves or whatever may not be allowed now. Continue over to the right. Going a little bit looser there. Might have gone over the edge of the building a bit, but that doesn't matter. Straight edge of the brush. I'm almost using it like a pen now. Got fairly good control of it. Get those straighter edges. And up to the right hand side. I don't really know what is over there, but that's that darker building on the right, which I've cropped. That's where I've cropped my composition on that right hand side. So a little bit of that dark building, just as it sort of tucks around the corner to the right and disappears off. Now back to that lovely gouache, sort of a thicker, opaque. Of course, it's opaque, and get in at another good edge. So got to be a bit careful here. Try and get it parallel to the right hand side, looking at that masking tape on the right hand side, and keep it parallel as I go down. Cool it up as I come down to the bottom. You can see it's a fairly wet mixture. Now go darker towards the ground floor. Picked up a bit of neutral tint. Paint around a bin or whatever it might be there. Bit of light against that. Now down to the road surface where that bit of blue is. And I want to try and merge the two together. I don't want a hard line there. And the danger is going over the overlap between the two would give me a bit of a dark edge. I just don't think it would look too natural. So I want a nice sort of transition from one to the other, and it's still just a little bit damp down there. I mean, that bottom right corner has been wetted twice, so again, using good quality paper like Saunders, you can keep the paint wetter for longer. Add a few more subtle variations of colour in the building on the left. Bit of this burnt sienna. For example, I could have added in a cerulean blue or a bit of cobalt blue into that surface just to get a bit of variation. Use my fingertips as well to move things along, or just quickly lift off a little bit of paint there. And this brush now is fairly dry. There's not much water on it at all. And good point to it. I could do this with a smaller brush, but for continuity, just create that little border there with the brush. I think I'm almost done on this stage of the painting, laying down that initial wash and some of the darks using this wetting wet technique, and nearly there. Got to be a bit careful now with the brush, just splaying out like that and showing some of the hairs a bit too much. Right, just speed up the video bit and go to the next stage. A few more details now. Paper has dried a little bit and gone a bit lighter. Smaller brush now. Synthetic brush, a round synthetic brush, size 4, dry brush, bit of dry brush techniques, and they can be quite good in watercolour, particularly with a bit of a rough surface. And you can create some more interesting textures and patterns on the paper. The paint isn't spreading so much, you've got a bit more control, and by layering the dry brushstrokes over wet washes you can create a bit more of a sense of depth and dimensionality in the painting. We've got a bit more control as well with the dry brush, because there's not too much water in there. Almost pure pigment in a way. Starting from the back here, let's do some windows. Now I didn't draw them in. I could have, just to be a little bit more accurate with the placing of those windows, but I think that sort of looks okay. I don't need to be, I haven't counted the windows exactly, but I just want to get the feeling of that perspective and the depth and the distance. The windows are, they're not perfect rectangles. That my brush, it's got a little bit of an edge to it, all right? So it's like almost like a very, very narrow flat brush. So I can just use that flat edge there. Great for doing windows. If you get a brush, a soft round or a synthetic round brush, and then just get the right amount of paint on there and get that kind of flat profile to it, it's great for doing windows. Just strengthen up that border a bit. And that one there as well. With the ground floor, I mustn't go in too dark because I do want some figures in the middle ground, darker figures in the middle ground, silhouetted against a lighter background. So I want that effect of the lighter background, not too dark then with these shot windows, but just try and get the impression of that shot window. Slightly larger one here with some panes between them. It's good to have a few windows that are maybe a bit more attention and careful painting applied to them, and that will give a nice sort of variation between the loose windows and one or two tighter windows. Just a few faint windows in the distance on the other side of the street, just down that road. Neutral tint, ultramarine blue, little bit of alizarin crimson as well. Mix it up there in the top. Very dry, not too much water on the brush at all. All right, left-hand side. Bottom edge of the roof. Just deciding now where to put some of these windows. And there's about 3 layers or 3 levels to this building. two little dry brush lines and then some windows, starting from the top, some windows on that top floor. Again, like the right hand side, not perfect rectangles. I didn't draw them in beforehand. Maybe that one's a little bit too tight on the end there, but didn't draw them in beforehand and try and get a loose feeling for them. Good also to get some windows with sharper points to them, not round corners. So good sharp corners, few windows a bit fuller than others, then some that are quite light. Some of this area will be covered with that tree, so again, I don't need to be too perfect with these windows. Our Patreon painting project above was a lot more challenging than this as regards the windows. We painted an area up by the Theatre Royal, and there were many more types of houses there, and a spire and cafes and street side cafes. So quite challenging. Just make sure the middle section is dry before I put in the market store. Just make sure it's dry. Yep, it's not too bad now. Back to a sort of medium synthetic brush. This is a Princeton number 12, and it's the Aqua Elite from Princeton. Great for doing foliage and also fine lines as well. But it's just a few millimeters longer than other brushes of a similar size or dimension. Grey also for painting around. I've just gone down for smaller synthetic brush now, just a bit more control around that figure. That's some of the boxes of fruit or whatever that's for sale underneath the umbrella, underneath the parasol. Quite dark, not too much detail. Start to get in a few figures now. And the figures here being on the same level, the tops of their heads will be in line generally. Just maybe a little bit of deviation between them, but try and get now a number of different figures out. Not evenly spaced with the figures, perhaps connect them a little bit as well. continue these boxes out into the street, that step pattern down to just past the middle. Figure here as well. Just try and balance up the figures as much as possible, but don't just have one figure, otherwise it looks a little bit bare and deserted. Want a good number of figures because it's quite a popular area at Bath, the central area of Bath. So we do want a few figures in there. Figures of different sizes as well. Try and get in a sense of movement in the figures also. Let's put another one just to the right there. There we go. And being winter, most of people's clothing is dark. Not black, but different dark blues, dark browns. Perhaps a little bit lighter for more distant figures. Continue on with the market stall. Neutral tint, burnt umber, bit of ultramarine blue. You can see the paint's quite thick here. And just quickly going over the surface, you can make some interesting marks where the paint is just connected with the surface and then a little bit get a bit of a gap, almost a sort of lost and found approach. Start of a few reflections. Now I hadn't, it's a bit unfortunate that one being right above the bollard, but I haven't done the soft reflections of those figures because I hadn't sort of put them in. But hopefully we've got the impression there of a bit of a damp, soft reflection in the road surface. Some greenery from the market stall. And just bring that down into the road surface. Green for the umbrella. Bit darker towards the bottom of it. It comes out just a little bit. Outside the edge of that building. Virgin green, neutral tint, going quite dark at the bottom. A few supports for it, quite important, so it doesn't fall down. Now add a bit of detail to what's going there on the left. Pick up a bit of water and Viridian green and a neutral tint for the main figure, jacket, rucksack, right arm. As you come down, I can just about still see the pencil outline of the legs. Bit of cerulean blue, a little bit more water, and left hand leg, right hand leg. It's a bit of an important stage here. The main figure's legs, trying to get them looking sort of all right, and a sense of movement as well, down to the feet. Sometimes for figures like this, I might do a thick dry brush mark for the legs if they're moving from side to side, a figure moving from left to right, right to left, then that can often give a bit more sense of movement. Shoes. And the start of a reflection of the figure. Left leg. Try and get a little bit lighter as I bring that reflection down. Use the finger a little bit to lift off some paint and get a soft edge. Bit darker underneath the base of the market stall. And also the other thing with the figure, it's sort of connected with the market stall behind. Just a little bit of light shadow this side of the head, so it's not just totally like a white head. It's got a little bit of shadow there. This building on the right needs to have a little bit of detail, architectural details, windows, and so on. And that complete window there got a little bit of a horizontal pane across it. Down to the ground floor. A few little verticals, and then a couple of shot windows at the bottom. There's a bin here. Leave a little bit of light on the top, a little bit of light on the left, but particularly on the top. Now for these bollards, and we can move these bollards wherever we want to. one there. Bit unfortunate I got it just in the same just in the same spot as the figure. Anyway, maybe I should have drawn that figure in, moved it slightly to one side. Some extra soft reflections, just a few, drag them down a bit, strengthen up that one a bit. It's good to get in a few geometric shapes of some of the boxes. In the store, just a few little boxes in the front there. They're just standing out just a little bit more. So we've got some fruit in that store. Pick up some cadmium orange, a good colour for some oranges maybe. Reds, oranges. I put the greens in already. Got that spring green in there already. Try and connect some of these objects just a little bit more. Fill in some of those lighter areas. Just too many lighter areas at the moment. Perhaps a little bit of flesh colour for some of the figures. Some walking towards us, some walking away. Perhaps just a little bit on this figure, tiny bit, not too much there. This figure's mostly walking away from us, so we can't really see the figure too much. And strengthen up some of the details on the building. I've got the tree to do yet. Maybe a few leaves on the ground, a little bit of warm shading. And then some of these larger windows, some darks in there, just to give a sense of depth to those main windows. Again, a few more little bits of street furniture, squares, rectangles, could be more waste bins or side of a bench or something. Just needs to fill in that space there. Strengthen up the bottom of the building just a little bit. Damp shadow for the bin and the window. And then the other window. need to just create a little bit of the edge of the road. Now, it's not strictly speaking the exact same position, but I'm just thinking about the composition again, being prepared just to change the edge of the road a little bit, introducing patterns into the road surface, these pavements, the gaps between the slabs in the pavement. Strictly speaking, not exactly like the photo, but just to help the composition and feeling a little bit of a curve of the road as it goes round over to the right there. I think this will look a lot more complete when I get that tree in. It's looking a little bit too bare at the moment. So let's get in the tree. Neutral tint, bit of burnt umber. It's quite dark and gnarly. Doesn't have straight edges. Lots of a bumpy, curved, or very organic tree. Lovely old tree. So get in the main trunk first of all, and it's going to just disappear behind the canopy, the parasol, and then reappear down below, disappear, and disappear behind the boxes of fruit and so on. Little bit thicker as I come down to the bottom, tiny bit wider. And then connect with the market stall behind. There we go. And then we need to suggest the twisty branches. So I'm going back to my long round brush now. Little bit more water on this brush, but looking at those twisty branches, trying to replicate those. And then connect also, going out, so extending from the tree, going to the outside of the edge of the tree and connecting with the other side of the street as well. That's quite important. Not continuous lines, few gaps, few little gaps in those twigs. And the branch actually comes down just below the top of the picture, just down below the top of the photo. It sort of comes out from the tree and then it goes up and then it's down and then up again. Strengthen up the bottom of the parasol, darker this side. A few darks in the darker patches in the stall. some verticals. Maybe could be drain pipes or just a slight bit of trim between the buildings. And some winter leaves, just a few leaves on the tree. They've still got their little bit of autumn colour on them. Again, just adds a little bit of extra dimension to that tree and the sky as well. Could have done a bit of splattering to this, but I prefer a bit more control with that brush, just to randomly put in a few little marks, go right over to the right hand side as well. Now some white gouache at the end and just a few highlights. Make sure I've got the right consistency here, that white gouache. Don't want it too thick, don't want it too watery. And this rigger brush from Lebenson it's a synthetic hair, very fine point, almost the thickness of a hair really, and great for doing lines like this. Also, I could have used that for the branches of the tree and the leaves as well. Would have been good for that also. Now, I don't want to overdo these lighter areas, just where there's a bit of light catching some produce in that stall, and maybe the edges of some boxes as well. Just a few little highlights. Verticals as well of the umbrella, the parasol. Just a few little highlights on the road as well. Not too many. Gouache does dry quite quickly, and it's quite dry on my brush now, so not too much paint is coming off. The windows in Bath, you can see there's loads and loads of white, little tiny white frames, which would be a nightmare to paint all those in. And I find that if I've got a white window frame, if I paint them in or leave them white or paint in the white, it just stands out just a little bit too much. So I just paint in a few paints here and there to create the impression of those. Some signage on the shops, not the full letters, just an impression of some wording maybe over there. And that's it, done. As I normally do, at the end of the video, a little critique on myself. So another damp winter's day in Bath and some soft reflections, but more of a practice of taking a photo and trying to explore all of the different compositions that you could find there. Zooming in, cropping, are you going to go horizontal, vertical, and so on. So I zoomed into the central area of this scene and cropped out a lot of the left and a lot of the right, and focusing on this street scene here with the walking figure going over. Perhaps the light head could have had more impact if it was, imagine that light head against that tree trunk, that darker the tree trunk. If the building was darker, that would have a lot more impact. But it's sort of all right there, and we've got a little bit of movement of the figure, the legs as well. Some distant figures to make the scene a little bit more realistic, and different sizes of figures, slightly lighter in the distance, bit darker coming towards us. Then these soft reflections, trying to use wet in wet, which we started off with, and then some dry brush marks there, that one there, and a few of the figures and bollards and windows and so on, and that tree, trying to get in that tree. Let's just get into that top part of the tree, those gnarly old branches. I think that really did make it, that putting that tree in. It would have been pretty bare in there. Could have put in a few street lights. I forgot to put those in. So if you're having a go at this, put in some street lights by all means. And again, that's something else that you can move around. Maybe some street signs as well. Also, there are some shop signs coming out from these buildings down here, but don't put too much detail in that area there. You want that to be pushed back. Keep it light, keep it very basic, keep it simple to push it back. Perhaps just a tiny bit too much white paint on the shadier side of the market stall there, but on the whole I'm pleased with it. I think I've got the feeling of a wet day. It sort of looks like Bath. Hope you enjoy watching it. Rather long video this. Have a go yourself. Certainly if you're on Patreon, pop it on the community tab there, and we'll all have a look, and I'll add in my 2 cents worth of comments as well. Catch up with you on the next video. Bye bye.